Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Shelly Epperly here. Today is Monday, January the 21st, 2019. It's 8 p.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in Los Angeles, 1 a.m. in London, and Sydney, Australia. It's 12 noon. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And we are continuing our experiment of doing the show on Mondays at a later hour to see if we can draw more American audience in. Since we are Americans, that just seems to make some sense. We have good listenership from around the world, but we just want to kind of boost it a little bit. So that's why we're doing a Monday night show. And Shelly, who came on a few weeks ago, has been kind enough to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Especially since it's not all that late where she is, because she's on the other coast. So Shelly, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, actually, Louise and I just had dinner, and we were watching a movie that we hadn't seen in quite some time. It's an old Anthony Hopkins movie called The World's Fastest Indian. And speaking of our friends in Sydney, Australia, he was actually from New Zealand, and he had a 1920 Indian Scout motorcycle that he had retrofitted and played with and futzed with and so forth. A motorcycle that I think had an original top speed of about 65 miles per hour, and he ended up messing around with it enough that he got up into the 170, 180, 190 mile per hour range, which was pretty darn good. And the movie is the story of how he basically almost hitched a ride to the United States with his motorcycle so that he could go to the Bonneville Salt Flats to see how fast he could make the motorcycle go. And it's a great story. It's talk about law of attraction. Every step of the way, he attracts just the right person to help him solve what the next little glitches in his plan. And there are plenty of glitches, but he meets these really interesting characters, kind of unusual characters along the way, and every one of them helps him to get to the place where he needs to be. It's just one long law of attraction story. And the only bad part is I didn't get to see the whole story because I had to do the podcast, but that's all right. Fortunately, I have seen it before, so it's not totally unfamiliar, but nevertheless, it was enjoyable.
Oh, that's good. I watched The Grapes of Wrath for the first time this weekend.
Oh, really?
My son Marley, he's going to be auditioning for the school play, and they're doing The Grapes of Wrath, and I'd never read it or seen it, so it was interesting. It was nothing. It was nothing that I thought it was going to be. I didn't have any idea what it was even about going into it. So
really?
It was interesting.
Yeah, that's certainly a classic, no doubt. The movie we were watching is not in the same category as The Grapes of Wrath. It wouldn't have fallen into the category of good literature. I'm not even sure most people have even heard of it, but it has so much charm in it. It's wonderful.
It sounds interesting.
And he was a coot. I mean, he was just a character. And by the way, this is a true story. It's not a fictional story. It's based on an actual person who came to the United States in 1962.
What's it called?
The World's Fastest Indian.
The World's Fastest Indian.
The Indian being his motorcycle. That was the manufacturer of the motorcycle. And he brought this motorcycle that he had futzed with for years to the United States and managed to set a land speed record for motorcycles under 1,000 cubic centimeters that stands to this day. I mean, he did it with, he had some of the strangest ideas about how you do things, but his ideas worked because he was constantly working with no money. It was always on a very shoestring kind of a budget. So, for instance, he wanted to have slick tires for his motorcycle because if you have treads and you're going that kind of fast, the treads can go flying off and your motorcycle will crash and so forth. Now, did he have the money to buy slick tires? No, he didn't. So he took a knife and he cut off the tread of the tire.
Oh, resourceful.
Very resourceful. Any racing official, any racing association today would absolutely throw him out for trying to do something.
Yeah, for sure.
He was great. He did all this stuff in order, and he actually pulled it off. He actually came to the U.S. I think 5, 6, 7 times, something like that. Set a few land speed records, and one of them stands to this day. It's just an amazing feat by a guy from down under. So. good story. If you get a chance, take it out of the library or get a copy of the DVD or something. It's a fun story to watch. Very unique. So, what's new for you in LOA land? Have you had anything really cool happen in the last week?
Well, I don't know. I just had an interesting kind of weird weekend because I was supposed to go on Friday. I was supposed to go visit my aunt in Eugene, which is about 2 hours from here. And I just felt like all week I just was like, I don't know if I should go. And then my daughter Madison had a really bad flu last week, and I was kind of feeling just tired and kind of drained. And I was just like, I'm not going to go all by myself and then be stuck there sick at my aunt's house, you know, and stuff. So I just kind of made the decision. My aunt was really disappointed because we'd been planning this weekend, but I just kind of made the decision not to go just out of more intuition than anything. And I never did get sick, but I just kind of felt like I still did the right thing. And I don't have any like viable reason right now, you know, maybe I'll figure it out or whatever, or maybe I won't, but it was like,
out. Figure what out?
Just figure out what the reason was why I was having such a pull not to go besides just
I see. Okay.
kind of not feeling so well, because even after I wasn't feeling so well, or before I wasn't feeling well, I just felt like I shouldn't go for some reason. And I just was like, I don't know, you just get those pulls in life that are just, you know, I just think it's important to listen to them. So it was just kind of a weird weekend, and I just laid low and drank a lot of tea with garlic and honey and lemon and, you know, just tried to ward off anything. And then we have like this outbreak of measles, which I'm not worried about because I had all my measles shots and everything, but there's been like 25 cases in the area, and all the schools are freaking out, and
as they want to do.
It's just a weird weekend. It was just, I don't know, I can't really, other than just listening to my intuition, there was nothing major.
Well, that's pretty big, actually, just listening like that, because, I mean, for us, the signals are a lot more clear than they are for you. Because right now we are experiencing sub-zero temperatures, and by sub-zero I mean sub-zero Fahrenheit. So I think we're expecting like -7 tonight, and with the wind chill it's going to be like -20, -30. So we're doing the obvious thing. We're staying tucked inside. We're not going anywhere. This is not a difficult signal to read at all. This is one of the easy ones.
Not too much gut feeling going on there.
No, not really. It's more like you stick your head outside and, whoa, that's cold. Close the door, quick.
Yeah. It usually doesn't get that cold here, but when we lived in Klamath Falls, it would get that cold. And I can remember going out in the morning to feed the horses and just like, you know, like just sniffing your nose a little bit, and the whole inside of your nose gets frozen. It's
right.
Like,
oh, yeah.
Wow, that's cold.
Yes. That's Louise's take on it. She says it isn't really cold until your nose hairs freeze. Once your nose hairs freeze, then it's cold, right?
Yeah.
So, well, this is a Q&A, and I see people are already lining up. If you're interested in asking a question or sharing a story that's going on or whatever, feel free to type that into if you're listening to the live stream, that is. If you're listening to the podcast, obviously, you can't quite do that. But live streamers are welcome to share anything that you want to share, and we'll incorporate it into the podcast. I always see Jeffrey saying hello. Hello, Jeffrey. How you doing? In the meantime, I figured we could just kind of come up with our own little questions. We've been trying that lately on some of the podcasts, and I have to say my co-hosts are very good at coming up with really challenging questions about the law of attraction.
Well, on the 19th, so I guess that was on Saturday.
Right.
I put out a post just on my Facebook profile or whatever, just saying, hey, you know, is there anything specific you want any questions or whatever? So I got a few, so I was just going to read them to you really quick.
Oh, sure. Okay.
I'll just start with the first one, and we'll see how far we go, because there was a couple.
Yeah.
This is from my friend Betty, and she's a fellow life coach, and she said, how do I go forth with confidence without feeling super full of myself? Or is that part of self-confidence? I work a program that stresses keeping my ego in check. I have been on a journey of connecting with my inner fire and have found the whole ego thing to be a stumbling block.
Mm-hmm. Does she give any details about why the ego thing is a stumbling block for her?
Not really. I mean, I know her pretty well. We converse pretty, at least once a week we chat a little. And I know that she's really struggling with, getting herself out there and getting her coaching business going. And like the marketing part of it, she just kind of feels like she's getting pushy, which I totally understand because I'm like that, in sales. I always feel like, because I hate being sold too. So I hate, it just doesn't feel good to try to sell something to someone else. The law of attraction is a whole different story because I'll sell that to anybody. But I understand keeping your ego in check, but we are human and the ego is part of our experience. Knowing you, I don't think that you would allow the ego to overtake confidence. You are too aware of that. You have so much to share and teach, so we all wait patiently. There will be those that aren't ready to hear it, and you have to be okay with that and focus on the ones that need to hear your confidence. Mm-hmm. So that's what I wrote to her. I don't know. I think that kind of comes along with like people pleasing, because there's a lot of people pleasers out there that don't want to disappoint and They don't want to, do anything for themselves because they were taught that it's selfish to, want anything for yourself and you should always be giving to others, which is a huge thing with the law of attraction, and just your spiritual journey is contributing to others, but you can't do that in an unhealthy way, in my opinion.
I think you're right. I think there's also a lot of confusion about about what selfishness is and what an overblown ego is. Selfish, and Abraham actually does a nice little piece on this. They I don't remember which book it is, but they kind of go on extensively about the true nature of selfishness, and they fervently admit that they are in favor of the idea that people are selfish. In fact, they'll point out that really you cannot live without being selfish. It's quite impossible to live without being selfish. And it's true. It's absolutely true. There's actually a great deal to be said in favor of self. And selfish has kind of gotten a bad rap, I think unfairly, because I think the word is misused. The general concept that people mean when they say that someone else is selfish is that that person is behaving in a way that is appropriate to themselves, but is also unfavorable or unfriendly to somebody else. And it's the unfavorable, unfriendly part that they're objecting to, and they're assuming that because that person is working from a selfish position, that's the reason why they're unfriendly. That's the reason why their behavior is unfavorable. And I dispute that. I don't think that's actually the truth. I think what actually happens is, first, we kind of have to start, I think, from the perspective that Abraham describes, which is everybody is selfish, and that's actually a good thing. So when somebody says that somebody else says, oh, you're so selfish, and they mean that in a negative way, I think it's more important to ask, why are they saying that? Well, they're saying that because there's something about the behavior that they don't like and that they want the other person to change. And most often, it's about the behavior regarding either themselves or somebody else that that person cares about or is interested in. So person A is selfish because they're not treating person B or person C right, and person C being the person that person B has an affinity with, says, well, you should be treating person C better, or you should be treating me better. Abraham makes a really interesting point about that. They say, well, no one ever points out that the fact that the person who's accusing someone else of being selfish is saying, you've got to change your behavior for myself. They never actually acknowledge that part, right? That's the part that they skip over. Yeah. They try to treat it like, oh, well, this is a selfless thing, which is nonsense. It's just a bunch of crap to say something like that. And I think that part is true. But I think what really happens here, and I think I actually made a note to your friend about this,
Yeah.
The reason people say that somebody else is selfish or full of themselves or egotistical or something like that is because there is a behavior that that person made that the accuser doesn't like. And they're basically saying, you've got to change your behavior in order for me to feel better, which is double flawed. It's double flawed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because of that double flaw, well, first of all, the biggest part of that double flaw is the assumption that that has something to do with selfishness, when it actually has very little to do with selfishness. Or to put it another way, it has everything to do with the selfishness of the accuser. But that's where things start to get muddy when you try to include selfishness. If you just limit it to what's the behavior is almost always because person A did something that was just not nice, not pleasant, not friendly. In some way, maybe it was mean-spirited, tearing somebody else down, saying something really negative, something along that line, which has very little to do with being selfish. It just has to do with not being nice to somebody else, or not being friendly to somebody else, or not being pleasant to somebody else. So that's why I said to your friend, just don't say anything negative about somebody else. No one's ever going to say that you're full of yourself, because that's the only person who ever gets accused of it. I mean, have you ever heard of somebody who was really pleasant and friendly, who went around town and just was really friendly to everybody else, and somebody says, oh, that person's so full of themselves? You don't hear that. That's not the way people respond. They don't respond to somebody who goes around saying nice things about other people by saying, oh, they're so full of themselves. It's only about people who say something that they don't like, or do something that they don't like, behave in some way that's unpleasant. So, very simple. Just treat other people well, and you won't be accused of being full of yourself. Now you don't have to worry about checking your ego all the time. It's not about checking the ego. It's about checking your tongue.
Yeah, and the thing is I think that a lot of people, because they're raised, I think about it. I don't ever think I did that with my kids so much, but I can remember it being a little kid, and you need to share that. You're being selfish. You can't have all that to yourself. And so when you're raised with that, it goes along with you, where like you said, like selfish becomes this negative thing. Like, you're not supposed to just think of yourself. You're supposed to think of other people too. So I don't think, knowing Betty, she doesn't go around talking, smack about anybody. She's a really great person, but she still has that
the old
block
tape
or whatever, where if she feels like she comes across too, confident, that people are going to go, oh, who the heck does she think she is? Kind of a thing, and I think we all have that to a degree. Like, we want to be liked. We don't want people to, go around going, what is her trip? Why is she being like that? And I think there's the 4 agreements, and the one that I don't even know what all the 4 agreements are, because I haven't read the book, but the one that I think about a lot is don't take anything personal. It's easy to take things personal when it's your passion, or it's people that you really, if it's people that you're close to are giving you negative feedback or whatever, but not taking things personal. So if someone comes up to her table at an event and she's trying to explain, her business, which is Positive Flow Enterprises. I'll throw that out there.
Okay, well, free plug.
Little plug for her.
Absolutely.
But she does a lot of events and stuff, and I think her thing is she's just when people come up to her table and she's trying to, come across confidently instead of well, this is what I'm doing, and yeah, I'm going to do this class, and I hope you show up, because that's kind of what a lot of her, she's putting stuff out there, and it's God, I hope people show up, instead of, there's going to be so many people, I'm going to have to turn people away,
right.
Just flipping that switch or whatever. So
yeah, that confidence or lack thereof can make a huge difference. That's very much for sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It also occurs to me that when we deal with this stuff, it reminds me of a passage that comes from an Abraham book, and I actually looked it up here. I actually copied this out and I saved it as a file because I use this and refer to it often. But it's from their basic book about the law of attraction, called The Law of Attraction, The Basics of the Teachings of Abraham by Esther and Jerry Hicks. And you can actually find it if you have a copy of the book on page 141. The section is entitled, Their Disapproval of Me is Their Lack. I think that really summarizes it. I mean, Abraham talks a lot about the two-ended stick, right? There's the thing and there's the lack of the thing. That's the two ends of the stick. Well, it's not just things. It's also attitudes and beliefs and thoughts. And almost everything has a thing end and a lack end. And that's what they're talking about here. And let me just read the 2 paragraphs that I think are really, really poignant from this section. It says, if there are others who see something in you that they do not approve of, most often you see their disapproval reflected back through their eyes, and you feel that you have gone wrong in some way. And we say to you, it's not their lack. It's not your lack, it's theirs. It is their inability to be the allower that brings forth their negative emotion. It's not your imperfection. And, in like fashion, when you feel negative emotion because you have seen something in others that you do not want to see, it's not their lack, it's yours. So when you make the decision that you want to see only that which pleases you, then you will begin to see only that which pleases you. And all of your experiences will bring forth positive emotion because of the law of attraction. You will attract to you only that which is in harmony with what you want. And by understanding the power of your emotions, you can then direct your thoughts, and then you will no longer need others to behave differently in order for you to feel good. I think it's really well written, the way they said that, because it directly addresses this whole issue of confidence, self-confidence, self-love. It also addresses the selfishness thing, you're so selfish or you're so full of yourself. It addresses all of it in 2 paragraphs and basically says, here's all the reason why that's nonsense, and all you really have to do is just focus on what pleases you. Well, that simplifies it a whole lot, I think. So I like that passage.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, what were you going to say?
I was just going to, if you have more on this one, that's fine. I was just going to say we have a question from one of our listeners to the live stream.
Oh, okay.
Here. This is Jeffrey. He says, as a coach, do you ever experience people who use your services to get through hard times and then disappear when things get better for them?
I kind of encourage that. I've had people, I've coached a few people and got them through what they need to get through, and sometimes it takes a week and sometimes it takes 6 or 8 months. And to me, there should be an end goal, and I don't want to keep coaching you or wasting my time or your time if you've got to a place that you're happy in, that you can, figure it out for yourself. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, our goal really, not just as teachers or coaches, but just as practitioners of the law of attraction, of deliberate creation, our goal is to be able to move ourselves forward, to be able to do our own growing, to learn from our mistakes, and to be better and better at focusing on what we want and keeping our minds off of what we don't want, and all this kind of stuff. That's our goal. So as a coach, I would imagine once you get a client to the point where they're doing that themselves on their own, you feel like you've won, you've succeeded, you've done your job, right?
Yeah, and I don't feel like, I don't really, if someone comes to me and they're like, I want to be coached by you, I'm like, okay, let's just figure this out. Let's just do a quick session over the phone, figure out what's going on. And then if they want to go on with me, we'll work something out financially. I don't have set prices or anything. I'm pretty open to that. I just feel like I should be paid for my time just like anybody else should be. But, on the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group, I help people on there all the time, and I private message them and stuff. And, they're like, what do you charge? And I'm like, if we get to that point, we'll deal with it. But, some people, they just need, there's one guy that I've been talking to, and he's in the UK, and I just absolutely love him. He's like a sponge. He's just he's he's just getting it. And he keeps saying it's because of the way you talk about it. It just makes total sense to me. And that's just it. I'm obviously doing a really good job with him, where someone else I could try to coach and they just be like, I don't understand. Why would I do that? Or, they just don't get it. And I don't want to work with those people, but I just feel like a lot of people seek out coaches when they are having a hard time. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with coaching someone and getting them through a hard time and then never hearing from them again. Mm-hmm. I'm not attached to that. So
that's good. That's a good attitude to have. I think also, when you're dealing with people who are, like you said, they're having problems with something, they're challenged by something, there's a really important factor that good coaches don't overlook it, but just average people helping other people might overlook. And that is the person who is asking for the help has to want to be changing. They have to want to change. There are a lot of people who ask for help and they don't want to make any changes. Mm-hmm. And you have to be ready to, right? I mean, don't you have to kind of be aware of that? And when you see it, you have to kind of wave the red flag and say, look, I can try to help you, but it's not going to work unless you're willing to make the changes. I've run into people like that.
Yeah, I have a few people that I've mentored for years that I'm just a broken record. Like, mm-hmm. They'll come to me every once in a while and I really need to talk to you. And I'm just like, I just feel like I'm just putting on the record and just playing it over and playing it over and playing it over. I'm like, it's not going to change until you change. Like,
that's right.
It is what you're going to keep attracting what you're talking about. You're going to keep getting those relationships, or you're going to keep having those money problems, or you're going to keep, whatever. I mean, I see the biggest thing, money issue. There's money issues and there's, your body and all that stuff. But people in relationships, when you first start coaching people or mentoring people or whatever you want to call it, it gets so frustrating because you can see it. Like,
oh yeah,
like clear as day. Like, you keep attracting these people because you keep talking about what jerks all men are, or what cheaters all women are, or whatever, and then lo and behold, another girl cheats on you, or another guy walks out on you, or whatever, and it's
right.
just like, until you get yourself together and realize that there are amazing people out there that will give just as much as you give, and take just as much as you take, and I can't even, like, people, we've talked about the whole soulmate and thing before, and it's like, I've been with my husband for 25 years, and there were so many times that I wanted to walk away. There was horrible times, there was times when I didn't care at all about him and didn't want to be around him at all, and now we're like better than we've ever been, but so it's like, there's like this whole path there too, because people are like, well, I want to find my soulmate, and they get with somebody and it's working out pretty good, but then, well, he doesn't bring me flowers enough, or, it's like something to me that seems kind of petty, like, well, did you tell me you want flowers? Well, no, he should just know. No, that's not quite how it works, I mean, yeah, in a perfect world, you want him to bring you flowers all the time, but if he doesn't know that, and that just the difference between the way women think and men think, in a lot of ways, it's like sometimes you gotta just be blunt. I need every Friday, I want you to bring me home some roses, period, like sometimes you have to be that direct, and I don't know, it's just, yeah, it can just get really frustrating when you are a broken record, and like I said, I have some people that I've literally been dealing with, and, just friends and stuff that come to me for advice. And then, like, before I really officially started coaching or mentoring, I had a friend, we were both into horses, and she came over to my house, and we were doing some stuff I was leasing a couple of her ponies for the kids, and she was over there, and she was just like, I don't know what it is about me, but people a lot of times will just spill their guts to me and when they hardly know me, and I didn't know her that well at the time, and she's just like telling me about all the stuff her husband's doing and stuff, and I'm just like, I'm a pretty blunt person, so I was just like, why are you with him? Like, why would you, what are you doing? Like, you're a smart, cute, beautiful woman, like, what are you wasting your time with it? And she was just like, I don't know. And then, like, I kid you not, it was like 2 or 3 days later, she called me and she goes, I left him. And I
Oh
remember
my.
just being like, oh my God, I just caused a divorce. Like, that was my first knee-jerk reaction, like, oh my God. And then I was just like, no, that's what, she came to me and was talking to me about it because she felt comfortable talking to me about it. And I was exactly what she needed at the time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah.
You know? And she left him and she was so happy and she was, you know, she was just, she called me to thank me, you know, and
wow.
like I said, you know, that, and I was panicking because I was like, oh my God, right. No. Like,
you thought you were the trigger.
Yeah. And it was, you know, looking back on that, you know, that was great because it was so immediate. It was like, you know, now if something like that happened, I would look at it as like immediate gratification kind of a thing because it happens so quickly. And when you are dealing with someone, when you are coaching someone who just gets it and just, you know, figures it out and like, I mean, this guy that I'm talking to and I keep telling him, you're going to fall back. And he just did, like, yeah, you know, over the weekend he fell back and I'm like, you're going to fall back. But you just have to have a different way of looking at it.
Right.
Instead of falling back and going, oh, this, I knew this was going to happen. This always happens. I'm never going to get better. Life sucks. You have to fall back and go, okay, what else? You just have to stop. Roll around in it if you need to until you get sick of it. And then you just go, what am I supposed to learn here? Where are the solutions to this? And if you look at it like that, it's almost an adventure when you fall back. It's like, oh, okay, so there's something to learn here and there's some new solutions that I haven't found yet, you know, and that was one of the questions on here was from my friend Jenny and she said, like exactly what she said. She said, I really want to hear about surrendering to the contrast and how to work through it. Cause, I think, you know, a lot of people think that if you fall back or you're in contrast or something happens, somebody breaks up with you or your car dies or whatever it is, that you're supposed to just be so positive about it. Like, oh, I'm so glad they left my life, even though I miss them and I'm completely heartbroken and I'm going to cry at any second. I'm just going to keep smiling and get through this, you know, or, you know, I don't have any money to fix the car engine, but I'm so excited that I get to ride the bus this week, you know, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with just being a human and getting into that ego a little bit and breaking down and falling apart and getting through it, you know, not getting over it, but getting through it. I think that's so important. And I think that the whole law of attraction thing you get so lost in, oh, you gotta be positive, you gotta be positive, you gotta be positive, you know, and then I feel like when you do that too much, when you do fall back or when things really fall apart, you really can't pick yourself back up again because you haven't learned that it's okay to fall apart and get back up and move forward.
That's an interesting phrase, surrendering to the contrast. I've never heard that one before. I mean, when you first read that, was that a phrase that you knew? And if not, what was your first reaction when you read that?
No, I've used that before, and I think that's the reason.
Okay.
I think the reason that she's asking that is because her and I were chatting on private message, and she was just, you know, she's just been going through some stuff, and she's just like, the last month or so, she's just been really high. She's been doing really good. She's been staying positive. Things have been falling into place for her and all this stuff. And then she just kind of fell apart. And she's just like, I gotta get positive again. And I told her, you need to just surrender to it. It's okay to just, you know, get in your jammies and eat a bowl of ice cream. Like, you don't have, you can just surrender to it. It's okay to surrender to the contrast. You just don't want to stay there, you know? You don't want to live there, but I think it's important for people to get through that instead of just pushing so hard to be positive all the time, because that's not the reality of life. You're not going to learn or grow if you're just positive constantly, you know?
I think I might phrase it a little bit differently, but I think I understand what you're saying. Because I think the way I would phrase it is, it's not that you can't be positive all the time. Rather, if you try to be positive when you're really hung up on what's going on and what that terrible thing was that happened, then you're really not being positive. You're faking it. You're trying to pretend that you're positive when you're not really feeling positive at all. And if you frame it that way, I agree with that. I mean, that's not doing you any good. Just trying to pretend that everything's fine when it doesn't feel fine at all just doesn't work. So that's a good time to, take a look at what's actually going on and kind of not live in it, like you said, but just, swim in it a little bit and kind of examine it from all the different angles and feel it a bit and take the sting out of it. That's ultimately what you're really trying to do. You're trying to take the pain and the sting out of it just by facing it directly instead of trying to run away from it all the time. And no, I got to feel good. Even though I feel really bad, I got to feel good. No, it's just, go after it directly.
What comes to mind is, so my dad committed suicide when I was 8. And so, I knew that things were bad. I knew that my parents weren't getting along and they were fighting all the time. But I had, at 8 years old, you can't even imagine that happening, right? And so I understood death. My brother, who had just turned 7, did not understand death and still, has issues with that whole time in his life now because he didn't deal with it then. And I just remember being told and crying, of course, just kind of flipping out as an 8-year-old. And I'm a pretty emotional person anyways, and reactive. I was a very reactive kid. And so they took me into another room and my mom was trying to comfort me and my dad's best friend was just let her go through it. Let her cry. Let her have, and I can remember him saying that, let her have this. It's okay for her to have all of these emotions and to be angry and to be upset and to be sad, and so,
Smart
that's just, that's a pretty traumatic, example, but it's true, you're, whether it's, something like that where it's just, it's devastating, or whether it's just, you broke a nail or you got to, on The Secret when you squeeze the toothpaste and it gets all over you. It's that can, literally that can make your whole day a crappy day, and it's okay to just go, that sucks. I'm going to have to change my shirt, maybe have that, cuss at it or whatever and get that out there, out of you or whatever, and then move on. You know what I mean?
Jeffrey asked a very good follow-up question to what we're talking about here. He says, can we examine the contrast from a less emotional place? In other words, can we be more objective with our own experience? Which is a good question, and a question that needs to be asked. And I don't know if you want to answer first or not, but I know what my answer is. My answer is being objective has no feeling in it. If you're not feeling, you're not living it. So objective is kind of a way of examining from afar, and that can have some advantages, but you're not going to get through it that way. You're not going to get through whatever, especially a difficult situation is, by being objective. And I can tell you that from roughly 61 years of experience of trying to do exactly that. It doesn't work very well. It's really rather counterproductive. It's not a full 61 years either, but no, seriously, a large chunk of my life, that's what I would try to do, and it never worked. It never worked. I mean, I could put it aside for a bit. I could bury it by doing that. I could hide it away, but it would never go away entirely. It still stays there until you take the time to just feel it and go through it. And the funny thing is, the amount of time it takes to go through it is a heck of a lot less than the time it takes to hide it away and just try to keep it hidden away for the next 20 years. It's dramatically different amount of time. So it's so much easier to just work your way through it and then you're done than it is to carry it on. But, there are some of us who just insist on carrying it on for years and years and years, and then we wonder why it is we have so many things that go wrong in our lives.
Yeah, and I think that when you get to a place where you can take responsibility for that contrast, it starts to go a lot faster.
It does.
When you're I mean, a good example is years ago I was, we lived here for a couple of years. I really need to pull the stove out and clean behind the stove, just 'cause, cooking and, dust bunnies and all that stuff. And so I, was just thinking that, for a couple of days while I was cleaning the kitchen, I really need to get, to remember when Scott gets home that we need to pull that out so I can clean out behind there. And then it was 2 or 3 days later, I'm making coffee on the counter next to the stove, and I, for some reason, well, I know the reason, I don't put the coffee pot back in the coffee maker and I turn it on. And then I go about my business in the morning, getting the kids ready or whatever. I come back in, there's coffee everywhere, and it has gone down the side of the counter between the counter and the stove and under the stove. So now I have to clean out behind and under the stove. And so it was just like, and in that instant when, you know, the initial like, oh my God, there's coffee everywhere. And then it was like, oh, this is what I was asking for.
It is, directly. Not the way you had in mind, but it was exactly what you were asking for.
That's where the specifics come in.
Right.
Universe is like, well, I'll make this easy for you. You don't even have to remember to tell Scott after work because it's morning and we'll get this done right now. Like, get him out of bed. Let's go. You know?
Sometimes the universe uses a 2x4.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, that's just an example that when you start taking responsibility for those, you know, like, you know, you've been wishing for a new car, you haven't been specific, you haven't said, I want a new car and I hope it happens better than I expect. You're just putting out there, I want a new car and I hate this car and I want a new car and I hate this car. And then that car breaks down beyond repair. Then you have to go get a new car. And the universe is like, well, you'll figure it out. Go get a loan or go borrow some money from somebody or go get another clunker so you can get around for another 6 months or whatever. You know what I mean? Like when you start taking responsibility for that, it helps you get clear on being clear. And it also, you can step back, you know, in that moment, you know, I was like, oh, yeah, I wanted to clean behind the stove, and here we are cleaning behind the stove. And it was like, you know, yeah, it was a pain in the butt because it's in the morning and everything, but I instantly knew what had happened.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
it's one of those very obvious things.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about how you would help people and they would make very quick progress because for them, it started to become obvious. It started to become clear. They were getting it. You know, it's like, yeah, I get it. I know what the next thing is to do. I get it. When I first asked my question to you, that like early in the podcast where I'm talking about somebody who is resistant to change, they're not ready to make the change. I was thinking along the lines of somebody who I tried to help one time, who was diagnosed with clinical depression. He was actually seeing a therapist. And I was kind of providing extra support so that the therapist was working on his past, I was working on his present, you know, that kind of thing. And I learned from that experience really well how important it is for the person you're working with to be willing to make change. And I'll give you an illustration from that experience. I worked with him for some time. I explained to him how law of attraction works. I explained to him what deliberate creation is. I explained to him that we have to take responsibility, blah, 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 all that stuff. I probably went through that 5 or 6, 7 or 8 times in the course of 3 or 4 sessions. And then I would ask him, we would take like little measurements, you know, right now you're at depression. Can we get you up to anger? And get him to talk about some of the anger in his life or something like that. You know, so I try to help incrementally climb the scale. And he wasn't getting there. He might climb up for like 1 or 2 levels and then he'd slip back down again. And he would never maintain any progress. I'm thinking, this is really interesting. Why is he not maintaining any progress? Well, he got a wonderful opportunity. He got the opportunity to go with a friend to, I can't remember which island it was, one of the Caribbean islands. It was a Caribbean vacation. I mean, just idyllic. Absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. And he was going to be away for a week, and they were going to do nothing but just have fun. They're going to do all these fun activities. I said, great. Here's what I want you to do. While you're away, and as you have each fun thing happen, I want you to milk it. I want every single fun thing that you have, I want you to just milk it and just get really excited about it, and then tell me all about it when you get back. He says, okay, I agree to do that. He went on his vacation. He came back. We had our first session. I said, so how was the vacation? I can hardly wait to hear how it was. Oh, it was okay. And he stopped talking. I said, okay, so tell me, like, what did you do? What happened? What kind of fun things did you do? And he thought for the longest time. He said, well, we rented some motorbikes and we went off-road biking. I said, well, that sounds like fun. What was that like? Silence. Absolute silence. And no matter how I probed, I could get little tiny details, but he wasn't recalling any of it. And I'm saying, well, did you enjoy yourself? Yes. What happened? Couldn't tell me. Which I found to be really interesting. Over time, as I'm talking to him throughout this conversation, and we had like one other session after that, and then we broke it off, I came to realize he never wanted to take the time to enjoy his trip. He didn't want to take the time to enjoy the activities he was doing. He went to take a trip for the purpose of taking a trip because his friends, his family, his therapist, his wife, everybody said, you ought to go take a trip and get away. And so he took a trip to get away, and he did all these fun things, and he didn't bother to enjoy any of them. That's somebody who's not trying. They're just not even interested in getting better. He took absolutely no steps at all, even though he promised that he would. Even though he promised he would have details for me, right out of his mind. And when
my analytical mind just says that he's getting a lot of attention.
Yes.
He's getting something from that, from being
exactly
that
where I was going.
Victim
There was great benefit in his mind to being depressed. And there was more benefit to that than there was in getting better. And that's why he wasn't interested in getting better. You nailed it. That's exactly what it was. That's why he didn't want to get better, because he was too invested in being depressed. Well, there's nobody in the world who can help him with that. Because as long as he wants to be depressed, and that is wanting to be depressed, hey, he's getting exactly what he's really asking for. And that's actually what ended our coaching relationship, because I called him on it. I said exactly that. I said, you want to be depressed. And he got really pissed at me, walked out of the room, and I never saw him again. I hit the hot button. I hit the truth, and he didn't want to hear the truth. So,
yeah. And I've seen, I haven't seen personally, but I've heard of people that'll, go to different therapists or counselors or psychologists or psychiatrists until they find one that will see them again and again and again. My husband sees a counselor once a week, and the first session, and I appreciated this so much because I just hate people professionals that take advantage of people and just keep seeing him. It's and the first thing she asked him was, the first thing I need to know from you is what is going to be the end game here? What do you need to not need me anymore? Right. And I was like, that's perfect. That is so perfect. That's what coaches and therapists are there for. There needs to be an end game there, what Jeffrey was asking, are people just, in a bad place and then just kind of use you until they can get to a better place? That's what I want them to do. That's the goal. I don't want to keep seeing someone for years and years and years and years and years and being their crutch and being the only person they can confide to, and they can't ever get better and trust themselves, I'm going to let go of that person like you did, I'm not going to keep helping you because you're not helping yourself. It's the whole God helps those who help themselves,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
I see it all the time. There's Facebook groups. There's a Facebook group here in Vancouver, and it's called Neighbors Helping Neighbors, and people get on there and they're asking, last night there was somebody that was homeless, and they're like, if we can just get a ride across town because the buses stopped running early on Sunday nights and we missed the last bus, and if we could just get a ride across town so we can get to our tents at my father-in-law's house, we'll be fine. We don't need to, because people are like, well, I can't have you stay at my house because I've got kids and I don't know you, which is totally reasonable, and so they were just asking for a ride, and honestly, I would be willing to do something like that for someone. They're going to get their tents and they're going to, hunker down and get as warm as they can or whatever they need to do. But then there's people on there that are like, I need, gas money and I need a job. And people are like, oh, well, this place is hiring. Well, I can't do that because I can't ride the bus right now, or I don't have any gas money. They have a million excuses, and it's even, you can just see in those groups, people are willing to help, but then it's if you're just going to sit there and wait for everybody to show up and throw things at you, it's it's just,
I saw a video one time of Jack Canfield, who appeared in The Secret. He was the author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. He was giving a presentation to an audience, and he really illustrated the point you're just making in a big way, although it wasn't just about somebody who's homeless, because it can really be true of anybody. Anybody can kind of fall into that trap, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he was demonstrating how most of the audience, without knowing it, was in that trap. What he did was he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a $50 bill, and he folded it into quarters, and he held it up with his hand like this. And he says, "I have a $50 bill here for whoever wants it." And then he just stood there. And he stood there. And he stood there. And finally, a woman from the audience walked up and grabbed the $50 and walked back to the seat, which is exactly what he was offering to do. The $50 is here for anyone who's willing to take it. Nobody was willing to take it. They all felt constrained in some way. Oh, well, I can't do that. They had all their reasons why they couldn't do that. Well, it wouldn't be polite. Well, he didn't ask me. Well, he didn't really mean that. Well, endless series of excuses. Only one woman in that audience had the clarity of mind to say, "He's offering me $50. I'll take it."
Yeah.
That illustrates it beautifully. We have all these little limiting beliefs built into our systems, and until we become aware of them and recognize them and notice that we're putting our own limitations in, where our no's are creating our negative situations, until we get to that point, then we will continue to ignore that he's holding the $50 bill up for somebody to come take. Mm-hmm. It's just that simple.
Yep.
So, let's see. Do we have any other questions? I don't have anything else in the live stream. You got any more questions from your little thing that you did over the weekend?
Well, this other gal it doesn't seem too clear to me, but she just put number 1, humility, number 2, the word normal, number 3, treating everyone with love and tolerance, number 4, importance of putting others first, helping others, number 5, prejudice, not the racial kind, the kind that means old ideas which get in the way of staying relevant, especially older folks. Oh, that's like her whole post. I'm not exactly sure.
It's a little scattered. It sounds like she was trying to address the selfishness question, the overblown ego question. And that's the kind of thinking that I would expect from most people who try to address that question. Because the ideals, if you will, that she expressed there are the popularly held ideals. You're supposed to only think of others. You're not supposed to you're not supposed to be thinking of yourself. You're supposed to be kind to others. You're supposed to, there's like a whole litany of things that go along with not being selfish. And that's what she was outlining there. The problem, of course, is that what she was outlining was in many ways tripping herself up, and she probably didn't even realize it, which is, she's still learning like we all are. That's her. She has found a block, and now she's trying to figure out, well, if she's trying to figure it out at all, she's faced with that block, and she gets to decide, do I want to stay there? Do I want to keep being blocked by it? Am I okay with being blocked by it, or do I want to move it past it? That's where she is right now.
Yeah. I was going to look, because I posted something earlier, and
Jeffrey said $50
friend,
a bottle of good wine. That's how he'd spend his $50.
Yeah, I thought that. My friend who is a pastor, our kids were in the same 4-H group, and I think he enjoyed being around all of us because, we didn't treat him like a pastor because none of us went to his church, and, the guys were throwing around cuss words and stuff, and, all the kids, we went to horse camp a couple times and did a whole bunch of 4-H shows and stuff together, and when we would accidentally cuss in front of him, we'd be like, "Sorry, Steve," and he'd be like, "No, you guys, it's so refreshing to be around people that are just being normal people and not treating me like I'm, Anyway, so him and I get into some discussions on Facebook because I'm a believer in the law of attraction and he's a believer in the Bible. So the post that I put said, quantum physics tells us that nothing that is observed is unaffected by the observer. That statement from science holds an enormous and powerful insight. It means that everyone sees a different truth because everyone is creating what they see. And Neil Donald Walsh said that. Mm-hmm. And so Steve said, if there is such a thing as objective or absolute truth, then this statement cannot be true. If there is no such thing as objective or absolute truth, then this statement cannot be true. And I said, the fact that we both see it differently is proof that it is truth.
Yeah, I would say he only got that half right. The first part of his was right, and the second part was incorrect, because the simple fact is, if you have an observer phenomenon, that's what you were talking about, that the observer affects the experiment, or the observer affects the situation, whatever it is, just by observing. If you have that, and that's always true, then there is no such thing as objectivity anymore. Objectivity requires the idea that the observer is detached from the situation. But if the observer is affecting the situation, there is absolutely no way for the observer to be detached. It's impossible to be detached. So really, there is no such thing as objectivity. So he was on the right track with the first part. The second part he was dead wrong about. But that's all right. We'll give him that. We'll give him 50% credit on it.
Then he just said, laugh out loud, touche. Seriously, though, the statement claims that there's no such thing as an absolute truth, and yet it claims to be absolute truth. And I said, yep, it's all in the perspective. It's so tricky because we all see things so differently. And he said, yes, we all see things differently, but our point of view doesn't change what is true, merely our perception of the truth. And so I just think because he's coming from the Bible, so it's the absolute truth.
He's coming from a theological viewpoint that the Bible is the written word of God. Yeah. Yeah, that's his perspective.
Those are the discussions that we get into, and I enjoy them because it challenges me to really think. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I think I've told you that before, that I just enjoy those discussions, and you know. A couple times people get on there and get very defensive, and I'm just like, no, I'm not. I love him. He's a great person, and we go back and forth, and sometimes we just end it with, let's just agree to disagree and have a great day, Steve. And he's like, okay, I'll talk to you later, you know, kind of thing. You know, so we have these discussions, and you know, I just, like the whole thing, don't take anything personal.
Yeah.
I really feel like I can get into those discussions with him, and I used to get kind of heated and freaked out and kind of reactive, and now I'm just like, no, this is part of my growth, and maybe it's part of his too, you know, but he's coming from the Bible and I'm not, so.
Yeah, clearly you had something to get out of it, otherwise you wouldn't have engaged in it. What you got out of it might have been different from what he would get out of it, but you both had something to get out of it, so. No doubt about it. Yeah, that's cool. That's very good. And it's great that both of you are able to do it without, you know, casting aspersions at the other person. You know, we just agree to disagree. Fine, that works. That works great.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you must enjoy it, too. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. And same with him.
Right.
He must enjoy it, too.
Yeah. He does, and there's some stuff that I put out there, and when I reposted that, I just thought, oh, this is going to be a perfect one for Steve to come back at me with. And sure enough, it was like a couple hours later, and he's posting on there. I was like, okay, let's do this. You know?
That's fun.
So it is fun. I enjoy it, but I enjoy it because I'm going into it with a fun attitude, not like,
well, that's it.
Oh, I've got to make him believe this, you know, it's like, I'm not ever going to make him believe this, and that's okay, but I have fun challenging myself in this situation, so.
Exactly, yeah. We can't actually ever change somebody else's mind, and when we realize that, life gets a whole lot easier. Because there are people, and I was one of them for quite some time, there are a lot of people who go through life trying to change other people's minds without realizing it's a futile exercise. There's just no way to do it. Because you don't control their mind. They don't control your mind. Even with all the talk, all the sciences about mind control. No such thing. You really can't control another person's mind. You can scare them into something. You can torture them into something, but you still haven't controlled their mind.
Yeah.
They control their mind. It's up to them. It always is. And that, I think, is a good thing. It's also a good place to end, too, because we've run out of time. But this has been good. And thank you for bringing those questions from your exchanges over the weekend. That made a really lively discussion. Thank you for doing that.
Yep. No problem.
Yeah, and thank you to our live streamers also for their questions. Jeffrey in particular, we appreciate your contributions, and we'll see you next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.